This is Surrogacy Unwrapped. Today's episode, Busting the Ignorance Bubble, breaking down common surrogacy myths.
Welcome back to Surrogacy Unwrapped, a Family Choice Surrogacy podcast where we break down all things surrogacy, fertility, and family building. I'm your host, Kristie, and today's episode is one that I have been really excited about because we are tackling something that comes up all the time: myths and misconceptions about surrogacy. Joining me today is someone who truly lives and breathes this work, Leah Potter, the agency owner and founder of Family Choice Surrogacy. She may also be like one of my best friends. We have been in each other's lives since 2018 or so. And
A long time.
yeah, very long time. I have been able to learn so much about the third-party reproductive field, specifically about surrogacy from her, and I am thrilled to have her on today to share her knowledge and experience, and I'm excited for you to get some nuggets of truth to take after this episode. So let me introduce who she is and her experience. She experienced her own infertility journey, and she began working at a local law firm assisting with assisted reproductive matters for over 5 years. During that time, she helped families navigate the complex world of surrogacy, embryo adoption, and egg and sperm donation while supporting them as they worked toward building their families. Her passion for helping others, sparked by her own experience, ultimately led her to launching Family Choice Surrogacy. Before she entered the fertility space, Leah spent 15 years as an accomplished organizational and human resources leader across multiple industries, leading teams and organizations to success. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Organizational Leadership and is actively involved in the infertility community as both a mentor and an advocate, especially when it comes to increasing access to family building options and financial support. Leah, we are so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Kristie. That was really nice introduction. I'm really excited to be a guest on the podcast today, and especially to talk about this topic because misinformation, so many myths are everywhere when it comes to surrogacy.
It really is. And whether it's something people saw in a movie or they read it online or they just made their own assumptions, it can really shape how they view this entire process.
Exactly. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a potential intended parent or a surrogate. Well, I saw this on a Lifetime movie. So today we'll unpack the most common myths that we hear and talk about what's actually true.
Yeah, or not even when we're talking to surrogates and intended parents, but our friends or the people we meet
Yeah,
on the day to day who have no idea what surrogacy even is and the funny ideas that they've come up with in their own head.
you're right about that. It happens all the time.
All the time. All right, let's get started. Probably the most common misconception that I think people have is thinking that the surrogate is the biological mother.
Yeah, this is probably by far the number one myth. Um, at Family Choice Surrogacy and most surrogacy arrangements across the country, we're almost always talking about gestational surrogacy. So this means that the embryo is created through IVF, and we're using either the intended parent's genetic material or using a donor's genetic material to create the embryos that the gestational surrogate will carry.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, through the process of in vitro fertilization, the surrogate has no genetic connection to the child she is carrying.
Absolutely not. None. She's carrying the pregnancy, but she has no biological connection.
And I think this misconception really comes from older forms of surrogacy or how, again, it is portrayed in the media.
Sure. Traditional surrogacy, which is where the surrogate uses her own egg, is pretty rare today. We've had scientific advancements and, of course, legal and statute framework. And most agencies don't work with traditional surrogates anymore. It still does happen, and it can happen in an ethical way. But because of the legal and emotional complexities, gestational surrogacy is what we see practiced most often here in the United States.
Okay. And you said family choice surrogacy does not work with the traditional surrogacy method. Is that correct?
Correct. We only work with gestational surrogates. Again, like we said, she has no biological connection to the child.
Nice. Okay. Moving on to the next one. A big question that I hear is what if the surrogate changes her mind? And honestly, I think I could also say on the flip side, what if the intended parents change their mind?
Sure. I would say, again, this is a top question that I receive. Can the surrogate keep the baby?
Mm-hmm.
This is a very understandable fear from many intended parents. But the reality is that this is a well-structured surrogacy arrangement. There are legal contracts, there are parentage orders. Much of this is established before the baby is born. And so, in reality, no, the surrogate cannot keep the baby.
And would you argue then, because of those legal contracts and the parentage orders, again, established before the baby is born, that the intended parents also can't just walk away? Because when I talk to surrogates or people who are considering becoming a surrogate, that is one of their top concerns. What if the intended parent decides while I'm 20 weeks pregnant that, you know what, I actually don't want the baby?
Sure.
And am I left with their child?
Sure. So, again, she has no legal rights to the child, regardless of what would happen. Of course, these are wanted babies, wanted pregnancies. Intended parents go through so much just to get to this point. I'm sure it has probably happened in history, but of course, not anything that we've ever experienced where the intended parents, walked away from the child. So
Mm-hmm.
she's protected from a legal perspective so that she would not have any responsibilities in the extremely unlikely event that that were to happen.
I agree. And in both circumstances, both scenarios that we just discussed, I would argue much of this fear can be eliminated because both parties are very thoroughly screened, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So, from the surrogate perspective, we're screening her from not only the medical perspective, but from a psychological perspective. She
Mhm.
undergoes extensive psychological testing and an evaluation to make sure that she is healthy to enter into this arrangement. These are women who don't typically want to add to their family. They just want to help someone else add to their family. So she's screened to ensure that she enters into this arrangement from a healthy standpoint from a mental health perspective. And then also from the intended parent perspective, they are screened as well.
Right.
They also have a psychological consultation to ensure that they understand the complexities of the arrangement. And lastly, like we've said, legally, everyone is has a legal agreement that they have obligations to abide by.
hmm So while people may see dramatic stories online or in movies, that is not reflective of how modern surrogacy actually works.
Right. Thankfully, no, not at all. Those situations are dramatic reenactments or
hmm
they're tied to outdated ways of thinking and scenarios that aren't regulated or perhaps weren't entered to in a safe manner. That's
hmm
just not how our agency and any reputable surrogacy arrangement works.
I agree. Okay, let's move on to another big misconception. Surrogacy is, air quotes, buying a baby.
Ugh, I hate to
Yeah,
hear that.
ugh, agreed.
Yeah. So, this one is really important to clarify. Intended parents are not paying for a child. They are covering medical costs, legal cost, travel cost, and then they are compensating the surrogate for her commitment, her time, the physical demands of a pregnancy, the risks that she's undergoing. And so
Okay.
they are paying for those costs to make sure that everyone is safe throughout the arrangement.
Yeah. So it's not a transaction for a baby. It is a structured ethical process.
Exactly. There are guidelines, there are regulations, there are ethical standards in place. And, for most intended parents, this is the result of a long emotional journey, and certainly not an easy process and
Mm-mm.
certainly not a shortcut.
No, I mean, yeah, almost any intended parents who have come to this place of choosing to grow their family or needing to grow their family through surrogacy didn't just wake up and decide today was the day. There was definitely a road that led them here.
I often say that for many intended parents, it's a last resort.
Right.
Oftentimes they've tried so many other family building methods, and really they just want to complete their family.
Hmm.
And like we said, this is a complex, expensive, emotional process. And so no one comes into this process without extreme education
Right.
and planning.
Yeah. Okay. Another myth is that surrogacy is only for celebrities or the ultra wealthy individuals or couples.
Yeah, I hear this a lot too, specifically, from outsiders who don't know much about this space. They certainly hear stories about celebrities. It seems like there's a story every week about a celebrity who,
It has been more
you know,
frequent.
yeah. And, it's true. This is an expensive process. I think those stories are obviously highlighted because of the prominence of a celebrity. But the people who utilize gestational surrogacy to build their family, it's incredibly diverse.
So, what would you say that looks like in reality? What are the clientele that you're seeing at Family Choice Surrogacy? Are you guys working with any celebrities?
Kristie, I always tell people that the people that we work with, they're everyday people, just like you and me. These are people again who've most likely struggled or can't build their family in the quote unquote traditional way. We work with heterosexual couples who have faced infertility. We work with same-sex male couples. We work with single couples, or I'm sorry, single parents, and individuals who have medical conditions that may make pregnancy unsafe.
Mhm.
But again, they're typically making a very general statement here, just everyday people like you and I.
Yeah, so it's really not one type of person. It's not just celebrities or the ultra wealthy. It's a wide range of families.
Certainly. Many of the people that we work with plan for this, specifically from a financial perspective,
Yeah.
over many years. They're, saving every penny. I've encountered so many different creative ways that intended parents have been able to save for this journey and plan for this journey, oftentimes using employer benefits or other benefits, or just a wide variety of options to plan for their surrogacy journey. And again, like I said earlier, it's a diverse group of people who pursue this legitimate path to building their family.
Hmm. It's definitely a commitment, and it's a path that many people are choosing after exhausting all other options.
Right. Like I mentioned, it's oftentimes, and hopefully, the final process that they have to go through to build their family.
Sure. Let's go ahead and transition to talking about surrogates themselves because there are a lot of misconceptions there too.
Definitely. One of the big myths that we hear is that surrogates are exploited or doing this out of financial desperation, and that's just not true.
Not at all. Especially, I'm a two-time surrogate myself, and I can tell you
Sure.
that is not the path that I took.
Right?
What are you seeing in your practice? What are these women who come to become a surrogate actually like?
Sure. Well, first of all, they have incredibly generous hearts. Speaking for you and all the surrogates
Yeah.
that we work with. But they are also thoroughly screened and to ensure that they're not being exploited or doing this out of desperation. They're required to be financially stable. They are required not to be on government assistance. They have had healthy pregnancies before. And again, they have to be in a mentally, sorry, a stable mental health condition. They have to pass intensive psychological testing and evaluations.
Yes. So, in conclusion, they are choosing this. They are not being forced to become a surrogate.
Yeah, you know as well as I do that these women have to go through this screening process just initially to even see if you qualify to become a surrogate is complex. They have to jump through a lot of hoops just to get the opportunity to potentially be matched with intended parents. And again, they're motivated because they see this as something that's so deeply meaningful. They want to help someone else build their family, and they're committed to doing that. And just honestly, I can't even put into words the type of women that we work with and their commitment and generosity.
I agree. And I'll say, as a surrogate coordinator, one of the best parts of my job is being able to do the initial consultation with these women who are applying to become a surrogate. And I have to ask a whole slew of questions. And I love it because I am meeting some of the most amazing, incredible women ever. Um, I don't know. I love meeting new people, and I think the women who put themselves out there to attempt to become a surrogate have the biggest hearts, and they come from all walks of life, and it's a really selfishly a wonderful opportunity to meet cool people.
You're right. I mean, how many times do we have a surrogate that we start working with and we will have a conversation about, her life and the things that she's done or her family and just you're right. It is truly inspiring
Yes.
to meet so many generous people.
Yeah, and
You
they
don't
just
see
come
that a
from
lot in the
all
world.
no, they come from all walks of life and
Yeah,
background, and yeah, surrogates are pretty darn awesome.
they are.
So another misconception is that surrogates make a huge amount of money, or maybe that they are doing this just for this, again, air quotes, huge amount of money. And before I let you, debunk this myth, I just wanted to say that part of, again, my consultation is talking to this candidate and asking her what compensation is she even seeking? What amount has she thought about? What has she seen out there on her Google searches, on her social media feed, etc.? And I kid you not, at least 9 out of 10 consultations that I undergo will tell me I haven't got a clue, or I didn't even realize to begin with that you could be compensated as a surrogate, or I haven't really sat down to think about a specific number that wasn't my main motivation. Um, and I believe it, after
Hmm.
especially hearing everything else that we talked about. And we ask, why are you looking to become a surrogate? Does your family and support system know? Do they support you, etc.? And again, in that same response, it's not, I'm doing it because of the money.
Sure.
And I just think that's incredible. So I will let you now debunk that myth.
I mean, you're exactly right. There is compensation involved with surrogacy, and that is a factor for many women. However, in our experience, it is never the primary motivation. These women are committing a huge amount of time. They have a huge responsibility and commitment for appointments, lifestyle changes, restrictions, and of course the medical risks that are involved with every pregnancy. And so they are getting compensated for those things as they should. But this is never a quote get rich quick
Hmm.
situation. And again, it is not our experience that surrogates come to this process just for the money. I would argue that if they did, this is really not a great get rich scheme
Yeah, there's
because,
probably better options out there.
right, I would think that there would be. This is a long, extremely long process. As you and I both know, they don't receive the bulk of their compensation until after they're pregnant and there's heartbeat confirmation. And there are months of
Months.
commitments, obligations, appointments, just a whole host of things leading up to that first compensation payment.
Agreed. And when it comes to what you mentioned earlier about the surrogate likely having some kind of motivation of the financial compensation, majority of the individuals have things like in mind. They want to use it as a down payment for a house. For example, I used my compensation to help eliminate or lessen my student loan debt. These people are wanting to put the compensation aside for their children's future. This financial compensation, and this kind of ties into what we were just talking about, the motivation of the surrogate, is not meant to be something that helps this individual stay afloat on the day to day. Compensation is so variable, and in which the time in which you receive compensation and whether certain milestones are achieved, you may not get that compensation. So it can't be something that the individual is relying on or
Hmm.
maintaining their lifestyle on. And that's part of a very thorough screening process.
Absolutely. Like we just talked about, if someone was wanting to rely on their surrogate compensation to support their family, that wouldn't, number one, that wouldn't be a good candidate. And number two, unfortunately, there may be a scenario in which she goes through this entire process and doesn't ever receive any compensation. Of course, she will receive reimbursements and, some of those fees that are
Mhm.
associated with some events. But again, that certainly wouldn't support a family,
No,
nor
it couldn't be relied upon
right,
in anything of
right,
that kind of nature. And I
right.
think that itself could be, a pretty big myth if the women
Yeah.
who are coming to this process with that hope, desire, or thought could help them skirt by for a while. It just isn't the case.
Yeah, and having been our surrogate coordinator for, the last 8 years, I
Hmm.
think that you, well, first of all, certainly can identify right away if someone is uneducated and would have that erroneous thought process that they want to, support their family using surrogacy compensation. And first of all, you would disqualify them because that's just not the reality. And
Right.
again, those are few and far between.
Yeah.
Thankfully, many of the women that come to at least our agency are pretty well educated. Of course, we will help further that education, but they understand the compensation structure from a basic perspective and know that this is really just something that they're doing out of generosity, and the compensation, while certainly appreciated and helpful, not the main motivation.
I agree. Okay, let's move on to a few more myths, starting with the timelines.
Yeah. We always joke, surrogacy is the process of surrogacy is hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
And it's true. The surrogacy process is not quick from, from an intended parent perspective, from matching to birth. You're typically looking at least 18 months. Obviously, we know pregnancy is 9 months of that, and that's a pretty expeditious timeline.
Sure.
We've worked with some journeys that have lasted years.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I mean, that timeline also includes the IVF process, the transfer, and that in and of itself is not guaranteed to work on the first try. And I think that is also a hard pill for people to swallow, in particular surrogates, because most often women who decide to become a surrogate typically have had no pregnancy complications, may have never had a miscarriage or a loss, and have only experienced, positive pregnancy outcome. And so when they enter into this journey, their mindset often is, I'm not going to have any problems.
I know.
We're going to have a very successful embryo transfer. It's going to take on the first time. And in many cases, they're 100% right. But there are a lot of cases where unfortunately it just does not take on the first try, whether
Yeah,
that's a chemical, miscarriage or a miscarriage in the early weeks. There are several factors that could take place, or perhaps during her IVF process, preparing her body for transfer, maybe her uterine lining didn't get to the
sure.
right thickness, or her hormone levels weren't where it needed to be for an optimal transfer. And that's difficult for people to accept.
Absolutely. And that adds, if we're talking about timeline, that adds to the timeline.
It does.
And uh, we've both talked to surrogates who say, I really would like for my embryo transfer to be in this month so that I can deliver on this month. And, we have to walk a very fine, balanced line with our parents and our surrogates because, of course, we want the best outcome. We want the first transfer and cycle to be successful. But statistically, that's just not, unfortunately, not the case. And so
Unfortunately, our
every,
puppet mastering skills are not
I
that
wish,
good.
yeah, I wish we could have any control over that.
Yeah.
But also to your point, these women typically haven't experienced loss and come into it with a very optimistic perspective, which I love.
Yeah, there's
But
positives to that, but
sure, sure. And walking that line of keeping realistic expectations. And I think we do that. I hopefully we do that well with our Foundations of Surrogacy education program, where we give them that education up front. Again, don't want to, you know, make anyone question their success, but just keeping the information
it's a
true and
fine
real.
line.
Yeah.
Very fine line. What about the legal process? Because people can be pretty confused about that.
Yes. And, it varies so much. So, surrogacy statutes and laws is a patchwork throughout the United States. So, every state has a different process or different legalities or different requirements that you must follow. And so, depending on the state where the surrogate lives, which is typically the locale that matters most, that process varies depending on where the baby will be born. So we will work with the surrogate in any surrogacy friendly state. And so again, some states are very surrogacy friendly, while others have restrictions or bans. And, typically surrogates are not allowed to travel to those states during the journey if they're pregnant. So out of protection for everyone.
Yeah, and some surrogates or intended parents may read online that, you can be a surrogate here or not here or whatever, and it could just be very confusing. And how would you recommend, they are being safe?
Well, first of all, working with an experienced agency or an experienced, I know there's some consulting firms out there, but
Mhm.
a professional, someone who can guide you through those legalities from a high level. And then, of course, working with experienced attorneys who are licensed in the appropriate jurisdiction. It's just so important to protect you throughout this incredibly complex process.
And I would argue too, working with an attorney who specifically works with third party reproduction and has surrogacy, knowledge and experience. Like, I don't think
Yes.
this should be your attorney who handles your divorce, that kind of thing.
Correct. Yeah, well, yeah, good point. It is really important that the attorneys involved have experience with assisted reproduction. We've had intended parents ask throughout the years, or a surrogate ask throughout the years, hey, my cousin's an attorney, or my best friend's an attorney. Can they represent me? Something along those lines.
Hmm.
And the answer is typically no. We want to refer you with those who have experience and understand the legalities in this very nuanced process.
And finally, this idea about surrogacy being emotionless or purely transactional, what would you say to that myth or misconception?
Well, first of all, I would say that is not the experience that we've had at our agency in the almost 9 years that we've been facilitating matches. It is incredibly emotional. From the surrogate perspective, she takes this obligation very seriously. And as we discussed before, she comes to this from a point of generosity, and that carries heavy emotions. From an intended parent perspective, of course, they're placing their family dreams into this process, and so they come into it with a huge emotional connection, and they fortunately, the majority come into this with just having so much appreciation and gratitude that they have this option to build their family. We typically do not facilitate matches that are transactional, just because most surrogates that we work with and most intended parents that we work with really want to build that connection. These journeys are built on relationships, they're built on transparency, communication, and trust.
Yeah, and that family choice surrogacy, majority of our intended parents and surrogates are from the Midwest, and I just can't honestly envision a Midwest vibe being transactional in any way, shape, or form. I
We're
just don't think
biased a
that's,
little bit, right?
I know, I just don't think that's our culture.
Yeah, and I always say there's no right or wrong answers when it
No,
comes to what you're looking for. If you wanted a transactional relationship, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. It probably just wouldn't fit well with our relation, or I'm sorry, with our agency. But certainly no shame in that.
no,
Again, this is a just an
it's
incredibly
personal.
complex, yeah,
Mhm.
complex and personal process. And so I certainly wouldn't want to say that that's wrong if you
No,
wanted a transactional relationship, but just not my experience with what
agreed.
we do at our agency.
I also kind of feel like that transactional relationship may have been more popular in the beginning of the surrogacy process, like when surrogacy first came around. I could be wrong. Maybe it's never been, but um, yeah, I don't think it's what most people envision when they think about surrogacy anymore, or I
Yeah.
certainly didn't envision it. when I went into it on my own personal journeys, I was really hopeful to match with intended parents who at least would want to communicate at bare minimum annually. And I was blessed with intended parents who I feel comfortable talking to whenever I want.
Yeah.
And I think that's also like, I keep talking about the intended parents and not so much the children that I helped bring into the world, but let's be honest, and most people
Yeah.
probably don't realize this, that when you were in this journey, obviously I cared about my little belly buddies. They're amazing and I want the world for them. But my heart and my relationship is with the intended parents. Those are the individuals that
Yes.
I am working with so intimately and like just closely for all of those months leading up to the birth of their child. Those are the people that I miss talking to on the
Yep.
day to day.
Yep. And, let's talk about that as a common misconception.
Hmm.
I know we didn't discuss this ahead of time, but, I've had plenty of parents who come in and they're afraid that the surrogate will bond with the baby or that the baby and the surrogate will be bonded. And it's hard to explain that that's really just typically not the case. Her bond is with the parents. And, from a caring and relational perspective. And of course, she cares about this child that she's carrying and she wants the best for them.
Hmm.
But that's not where the bond is typically formed. And
And this bond starts like in my consultation with people they don't even know yet, who they haven't even read a profile on. When I say, what is the one thing that makes you most excited about becoming a surrogate? I will again argue 9 out of 10 times she is telling me, I just cannot wait for the moment where I get to see them meeting their child for the first
yep,
time.
yep. We
That's
talked
the
about,
thing.
yep. We talked
That's what
about
they want.
compensation.
Hmm.
Her reward typically is
Yeah, that
that moment
one
of seeing it.
singular moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because they know, the surrogate candidate knows how incredible, how much emotion it was meeting their own child for the first time after birth. She can't wait. She literally cannot wait to see their
Yep.
joy, their all the emotions that come with having a baby and
Yep.
to watch their faces. And again, she'll keep that baby safe. She loves that baby like, her best friend's kid or her niece or nephew, whatever, but it's the heart and the emotions and everything that's coming, parenthood for those people that she decided to match with.
Absolutely. Yep. That's again making very broad statements, but that is
Sure.
what
In
we
general.
see. Yep. That is exactly what we see.
All right. So, why do you think these myths continue to persist? Why do you think they are still such common issues that we see after all these years together?
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, from media portrayals, I mean, we've all seen a TV episode or a movie or something in the media that portrays incorrect information or is just meant for entertainment value and not how it really happened. So, of course, that has a wide reach, and people see those things, and it creates fears. There's also a lot of outdated information. This field changes quickly. Science changes quickly, laws change quickly. Well, not as quickly as we'd like, but all of that to say, you know, um, it's not always easy to find the most up to date what's really happening in, third party reproduction. And then,
Leah,
of
I'm going to
course,
put you on the spot real quick, and you may not know this answer. And
oh
so I
no.
apologize if you don't, because I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Do you recall what year the first child was born via a surrogate?
I think she just turned 42. Oh, I hope I'm not.
I think you're in the right ballpark, but
Yeah, I'm close
without
there.
taking a second to fact check you, I don't know. But the
Yeah,
point is, surrogacy has not been around for forever, and things are constantly changing.
sure. Yeah. Um, it changes, and from my experience, it changes for the better. I
Mm-hmm.
always talk about my IVF experience versus the one that I see with, typically for our parents and our surrogates today, in terms of embryo testing and what you can, and grading and protocols and all of those things. So everything changes pretty quickly, and so it's hard to know what it really looks like unless you're in it the day to day, which we are. And so hopefully we're able to educate and you know debunk some of these misconceptions and myths, not only through educational podcasts but through our conversations every day.
I agree. Conversations like these matter so much. Education leads to understanding, and understanding leads to empathy.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. And I'm just really thankful to be a guest and be able to just, share our experiences and share that these myths and misconceptions, what the reality is behind them.
I agree. Leah, this was so helpful. I have enjoyed having you here with us on Surrogacy Unwrapped. I feel like we cleared up so many of the biggest misconceptions that are out there.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You know, I know we both believe that the more accurate education information that people have, the more empowered that they can feel to explore all of their options.
I agree. If you are listening and some of these myths are things you have heard before, you're not alone. Surrogacy is complex, but it is so incredibly intentional, ethical, and meaningful when it is done in the right way. We want to thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of our Surrogacy Unwrapped podcast. We have many other episodes up. Go take a listen if you haven't done so already, and we will be back next month with a new topic.
Thanks for having me, Kristie. I could talk to you all day about this.
Same. Bye, everyone.